The NBA draft is only a couple of days away, and who should the Toronto Raptors take? Should they trade down? Should they stay at 9? Should they try and trade up? Should they take on more lottery picks? We will talk about it all. Okay, folks, I thought since we've talked, especially Raptors Republic, has talked ad nauseum about almost every single prospect that has the potential to become a Toronto Raptor on Wednesday, I figured I would just kind of like lay the law of the land while also giving you my perfect Raptors draft night. My first thing is I do not believe they should trade this pick for Kevin Durant. Maybe they end up trading for Kevin Durant, but I do not believe that this 9th pick is something that they should include. I don't believe Jakob Poeltl. To be honest with you, I actually don't even believe the Raptors are going to end up trading for Kevin Durant. I think he's either a Rocket. Maybe by the point you see this video, he's already a member of another team. But I would put the chances of Kevin Durant being on the Toronto Raptors at a very slim chance. And so my first order of business to a perfect NBA draft for the Raptors is that they don't trade for Kevin Durant. That's number one. Number two, and this is kind of debatable, open to interpretation here. And so I think I actually want to lay it out a little bit differently. I can see the arguments for trading down. That being said, I would only trade down, the Hawks have 13 and 22, the Thunder have 15 and 24. The Nets obviously have multiple late first round picks. I would only entertain those ideas if you believe the player that you were going to get at 9 would still be available to you at 13, would still be available to you at 15, or wherever you decide to trade for. So the trading back scenarios, to me, rely on you being on the clock. Raptors are on the clock. They have 5 minutes left. Who's available on the board, first and foremost? And so I'm not necessarily sure the trade down. I mean, it makes sense generally. But the other part of this is that given where the Raptors are headed, which is trying to be competitive, trying to be a playoff team, Michael Grange reported that they're trying to have a puncher's chance at making the Eastern Conference Finals. Not necessarily sure if this team is currently constructed has a chance to do that, but they're clearly going to make some sort of trade. I personally think they should just draft at 9. Reason I say that is because it's unlikely that they will get another top 10 pick in the draft in the next few years, unless they decide to completely shift their direction, restart, et cetera, et cetera. I think they are on an upwards trajectory, and that makes it unlikely that they're going to get a top 10 pick again. So you got to maximize this opportunity for yourself. And again, if you still have a chance to draft whoever you wanted at 9, at 13, at 15, at 12, whatever, then yes, I would understand the logic in doing so. But if you don't have the chance to do so, I think you should just draft the player you like at number 9 and be happy with it. So, at number 9, right? I'm automatically disqualifying Cooper Flagg, Dylan Harper, VJ Edgecombe. I just don't think there is even a 1% chance. Shout out to Oppenheimer, less than 0% chance. Yeah, I that's how low of a chance it is that either three of those guys are going to somehow end up on the Toronto Raptors, either via trade up or by somehow, some way, those teams. It's just not possible, folks. It's not going to happen, okay? No Cooper Flagg, no Dylan Harper, no VJ Edgecombe. The guys that I would be very, 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 very happy about being there at 9 for them. I have a list here for you, and I'll drop it on here as well, just so we can talk through it. But Ace Bailey, Tre Johnson, Carter Bryant, Jeremiah Fears, Kon Knueppel, and Derik Queen. The reporting around Ace Bailey seems that his floor is the 8th pick with the Brooklyn Nets, and so he probably ends up being in that disqualified category too, in the sense that I don't think he'll be there at 9. Is there a chance he's there at 9? Yeah, I think there is a decent chance. I don't think it'll happen though. I would bet against it if I was a betting man. And so to me, like if Ace gets there at 9, it's a home run in the sense that you have this huge talent, crazy shot maker. He takes a shit ton of difficult shots That is the thing with Ace. It's like you look at his tape and you look at the shot attempts with Rutgers and you're like, dude, if this guy pans out, holy crap. If he doesn't, he might end up being out of the league. And that's how much of a floor it is for Ace Bailey. That being said, like, who knows? He's so young and he could eventually develop into a really good 3-and-D guy, even if he doesn't hit that eventual ceiling. It's just about, can he do the mental side of things to buy into that role? From all the reporting we've seen over the last couple of weeks is that Ace is pretty bought into, hey, I want to be a high usage guy. I want to get opportunity, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not necessarily sold that the Raptors are a team that would make sense for him in that regard, because they have Scotty Barnes, they have Brandon Ingram, they obviously have Quickly. These are guys who are going to use, that are going to have a lot of usage and a lot of touches and a lot of opportunity. And so where does that put Ace? That's why, to me, it makes sense for Brooklyn or New Orleans or Washington to be the teams that end up with Ace Bailey. But it would be a very, very good outcome for Ace to be with the Raptors. I think developmentally it would make a lot of sense. I think he would be able to come in slowly, figure things out, honestly be a rotation player in the sense that he can make shots, knock down shots, and be a big body. Hopefully the defensive side of the floor kind of tracks with him. I think there's a focus element there with Ace, in the sense that sometimes he loses focus on the defensive end, and so that like length and athleticism that you would think would translate well doesn't necessarily all the time. Anyways, Ace Bailey would be awesome here. Tre Johnson is probably either my second or probably my second favorite player. VJ Edgecombe is my favorite player in this draft, but Tre Johnson absolutely is a dynamite and would fit so well. Probably the best movement shooter in the draft. Maybe you could debate Kon Knueppel, but just a ridiculously talented mover. I believe it was Ryan Russillo say that like he takes a lot of NBA shots, and that's unequivocally true. Takes a ton of NBA shots, comes off of pin downs, shoots with confidence. Just makes so much sense in the Raptor system that requires you to constantly be moving, and Tre would fit the bill of that. A lot of conversation about his finishing at the rim, not the greatest finisher at the rim. I think that will look better in the spaced out NBA world of things, but I really do think that eventually he can become a 3-level scorer, especially if he develops that like soft, mid-range and short-range shot, which I think he absolutely has the capability of doing. Tre Johnson, also a guy that I doubt would be there at number 9. That's why I would be overjoyed if this was the case. Same thing goes with Jeremiah Fears and Kon Knueppel. Doubt that they would be there at 9. For Fears in general, it's a bet on a guy who has a tremendous amount of upside, wildly talented ball handler, wildly talented at getting to the paint and getting to the basket, very, very good in transition. The three-point shot obviously needs to develop, and it's hard to see a small guard like that succeeding without either being a very good defender or a three-point shooter, and honestly, you probably need to be both. And to me, it's unlikely that he becomes a good defender. It's more likely to me that he becomes a good shooter eventually. But you have to really believe in that to believe in Jeremiah Fears as a prospect. That said, he provides something the Raptors lack, in the sense that he's a guard who can create for himself, get to the teeth of the defense. I don't think they even have that in a guy like Immanuel Quickley, and he would be a very cool prospect to watch develop. I also think the Raptors would give him the time and sort of allow him the space to be able to figure things out for himself. There's no pressure for him to go out and compete immediately. Fears would make a lot of sense. Also would be overjoyed. Also would be surprised if he's there at number 9. Kon Knueppel, there is the duplication kind of thing issue going on here with Grady Dick and Jacoby Walter, in the sense that they're both like 3-and-D complementary dudes. I do think there's something to be said about throwing in a guy that can be equally as competitive as those two and seeing which one makes it. I think that's healthy competition to have in a locker room, where these 3 guys would be fighting for minutes and fighting for opportunity. And Knueppel is very talented. I mean, he just does a lot of things right. Very like smart player on the floor, but also I think the shooting is ridiculous. I think he's shown more flash of like finishing at the basket, working in dribble handoff scenarios, being a playmaker for you, an all-around game that I think has some potential to have a higher ceiling than some might think. That said, even at a floor, you can see Knueppel being a guy who makes sense for you. And so I would be overjoyed. Again, I would be pretty surprised. And truthfully, I think I would put Knueppel last in this group of players. And I mean, the two most likely guys to be here at 9 that I would be overjoyed for are Carter Bryant and Derik Queen. Samson and Tre have talked ad nauseum about both of these players. Samson is incredibly high on Carter Bryant. Tre is incredibly high on Derik Queen. I've obviously listened and talked to them both, and we've all kind of had an opportunity to talk about them and kind of discuss, and they've made their sales pitches and whatnot. They do much more insightful work in terms of research and whatnot to watching these players. Truthfully, I'm like watching, I'm engaging, I'm looking at stats, I'm listening to people, but in the sense of like diving into watching multiple games of these players, I don't have the time to do so. I'm covering the NBA Finals. I'm covering the NBA as well. It's hard to do that. That said, I really do like Derik Queen and Carter Bryant. Carter, you are betting on tons of potential in the sense that he didn't get a lot of opportunity in Arizona, came off of the bench. There's not a lot of good tape there as a self-creator. And I was talking to a couple people about that idea, and I was like, "Hey, is like the high school tape worth it at this point? Like, if I do it, am I watching this high school tape for no reason, or is there something really there?" And most of the responses I got back was that like there is something there, but I would tread carefully in believing it too much because the ball handling is up and down with him, and even in high school, he still struggled to create space for himself as a shot creator. And so can you get it to a level where he can attack closeouts cleanly? He can be on balance. That was a big issue with OG Anunoby for a really long time. Can he be on balance? Can he be a guy who can make plays on the go? We'll see. These are questions that no doubt apply to Carter Bryant. That said, I love what he brings on the defensive end. I think he is day one going to be a very good to pretty good three-point shooter. I think his shooting off of movement will have to improve, but standstill, very good three-point shooter. And so the floor for a player like Carter Bryant is that he can absolutely be a rotation player for you. And realistically, because of his defensive acumen, can probably be a playoff rotation guy for you. Can he be more? Is he worth, expending a lottery pick for? I guess that just goes down to your philosophy. But to me, this archetype of player is something the Raptors so desperately need, so desperately miss from not having a player like OG Anunoby. And I think Carter Bryant would be able to step in, be a point of attack defender, be a guy who can muck up actions for you almost immediately, truthfully. Even though he is still young and he still has to grow his body, etc., I really believe in Carter's upside defensively to maybe even be an all-defense type of guy. Yeah, that's Carter Bryant. Derik Queen on the other side. I know Derik Queen's a pretty polarizing player on the Raptors side. The reason I think he's polarizing is because people are not sure whether to buy into the shot. People are not sure whether to buy into the defense. And I think those are valid concerns. You look at Derik Queen's shot; it is not pretty. It's not a pretty jump shot. He kind of looks like he's way ahead of his hand. Like it's kind of looks like he's like pushing it. You guys ever watch Joakim Noah? Kind of looks like a Joakim Noah jump shot. It's not pretty. Is it workable? Is it fixable? From what I looked at on Synergy, he was a pretty decent long mid-range shooter, which should bode well for him to eventually, be able to stretch that out. They obviously will have to work on his mechanics and changing that a little bit. How much is the question? On the defensive side of the ball is where I think I would push back on people saying that he wouldn't work defensively with this team. I think having a player like Scotty Barnes would actually bode incredibly well for a player like Derik Queen to survive on the defensive end. And not only survive, but potentially even thrive on the defensive end. We're seeing Alperen Sengun right now. He was on the Rockets, and the Rockets had a top 3 or 4 defense. They were better with Sengun on the floor for portions of the season. I remember I wrote about Sengun in January, and at that point, they were better on the floor with him. Not sure if that changed, but for the first 3 or 4 months of the season, the Rockets were a better defense when Sengun was on the floor. The reason he was so good was, 1, defensive rebounding. He was huge at that. 2, he was incredible at being active with his hands, deflections, in pick and rolls, activity, right? like being big in pick and rolls was a good thing too for Alperen Şengün. And I think that's the way Queen could survive on the defensive end. On top of the fact that the Rockets' infrastructure was incredibly great, was perfect for what Şengün couldn't do, which was react and recover out to space and cover space and be able to like cover ground very quickly. And so Jabari Smith Jr., Amen Thompson, obviously Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks, those guys were elite at screen navigation. They were elite at popping out to shooters. They were elite at covering ground. And so that alleviated some of the pressure off of a guy like Şengün. Is it hard to build around those guys defensively? Yes, but I actually think the Raptors have that infrastructure to do so defensively with Jakob Poeltl, with Scotty Barnes. I think Jacoby Walter can be like that. I think there's a world in which, Jamal Shed can eventually become a pretty good positive defender. They have the infrastructure. Brandon Ingram, size, length, right? I don't think BI is like a defensive stopper by any means, but as a help defender on the help side, he can do some things for you. So I don't know. I believe in Queen being able to be feasible defensively. The jump shot is undeniably a question, but I think he's such a talented offensive player in the sense that he can create his own shot, in the sense that he can finish around the basket, in the sense that he has a beautiful feel with the ball in terms of making plays, and that matches what the Raptors want to do with their bigs. Derik Queen, I'm all in on. And so those two guys, Carter Bryant and Derik Queen, are probably my likely scenarios and would be my picks for the perfect picks. Yes, any of these guys would be incredible, but like I said, it's unlikely that Ace Bailey, Tre Johnson, Jeremiah Fears, or Kon Knueppel end up at number 9. If they are, it would be great for the Raptors to draft those guys. The two guys that I think are both feasible, possible, and would be awesome for the Raptors, Derik Queen and Carter Bryant. Okay, the next group of players is sort of like content, let's cook. And that's Kaman Malawach, Nolan Traore, Rasheer Fleming, Colin Murray-Boyles, Cedric Coward, Thomas Sorber. I'm not going to go too deep into these guys. This is my perfect draft. And I think there's a world in which I would be like pretty satisfied with picking any of these players. Malawach obviously has his abilities as a guy, vertical spacer, potential to maybe stretch the floor. Obviously, he's a giant, and that would bode really well for the Raptors, hopefully eventually defensively. Nolan Traore, really intriguing French guard, good athlete, can get downhill towards the end of his season, showed a propensity to be able to be aggressive and score the ball. He has a really great knack for making plays. I think he can be a good defender in the league. Makes sense to me in terms of a guy you want to bet on upside-wise, especially because, he was projected to be a top 5 pick in this draft at one point. Rasheer Fleming, also a big fan of Rasheer Fleming, kind of fits that Carter Bryant-ish role, but he's longer and probably ends up playing more big than wing. Samson mentioned like Naz Reid as a comp for him. Maybe. Yeah, that would be a pretty cool comp. If he can shoot like that, that would be a great turnout for Rasheer Fleming. I think he'd be a very good defensive prospect too, just because of that length. Would be really intrigued with Rasheer Fleming. Colin Murray-Boyles, a lot of conversation about Colin Murray-Boyles and what he can do. There's obviously questions about the offensive side with the shot, and he's obviously smaller than some of these other guys. Like, he's smaller than Derik Queen. He's obviously smaller than Malawach. Like, how is he going to... He kind of reminds me of Jonathan Mobo, to be honest with you, but better touch, very versatile defensive player. I would want to say they're probably like similar in terms of length. I don't remember the measurements exactly for what Jonathan Mobo was, but Murray-Boyles is more talented as a finisher and scorer than Jonathan Mobo was. Obviously can't shoot. Neither of those players could shoot. Can he develop that side? That's a big question. But I think the feel, the passing, all of the defensive acumen, it's very Mobo-esque. Do you have room for two of those types of players? Maybe you do. Maybe you do. I would be intrigued with Colin Murray-Boyles. Would have to be sold a little bit, but I would be down. Cedric Coward and Thomas Sorber. Sorber is like your traditional big in the sense, I've actually heard the Roy Hibbert comp because he's not like a jump out the gym type, but he's really good at staying vertical, really good at finishing around the basket, is very like intuitive with the way he uses his hands. That's the coolest part about Sorber. Like, he gets into positions and kind of situations where you would expect a big to not be able to. Decent at hanging out in space and guarding in space, so he'd be like an intriguing center. Also, can make plays with the ball, can pass. I think there's a potential for him to like eventually be a decent scorer in the league too. Sorber is intriguing. I kind of he's pretty close to like actually being bumped up to that next category. Same thing with Cedric Coward. I'm just not sure if either Coward or Sorber I would take with the ninth pick. This is maybe more of a trade down scenario where you can still get your guy, but yeah, Coward is dynamo. Like obviously, pretty cool story from D3 to was it Eastern Washington or Washington State, and then eventually there was potential for him to go to Duke, and he's like, nah, I'm going to the league, bro. But Coward is cool. Like crazy score. Seems like he can basically score against anybody. How much of what he did in college translates to the NBA is probably the biggest question here. He would probably have to have a really good workout with the Raptors for them to be bought in. And I'm not sure. I'm not necessarily sure. But like I think I could be in on Cedric Coward. I would be in. This next category is guys I would understand. Like I'm not necessarily like jumping over the moon for these guys, but I would understand the logic in the Raptors drafting them. That's Kasparas Giannis, Asa Newell, Danny Wolf, Noah Senge, and Hansen Yang. Giannis, I understand, Raptors need another ball handler. Very creative with the ball, good finisher, took a shit ton of contested shots, and you hope that the NBA spacing can allow him, NBA spacing and a good screener like Jakob Poeltl can allow him to get easier and cleaner looks. If you believe in the jump shot, he can be a pretty good player for you. From basically everything you hear about him is that like he's a worker and he grinds, and so that's a great characteristic to have. Asa Newell is an interesting player, kind of more of a tweener, like a 4-5 instead of a 5. I've heard like Brandon Clark as a comparison, but he's wildly athletic, can kind of jump out the gym, takes a little bit to load up to actually dunk, has shown potential to shoot. Not sure if the Raptors are going to lean into that aspect of him, but you could see him as a guy who like crashes the offensive glass and contest shots and, is just kind of like an energy big off of the bench. I think he would be a rotation player. I'm not sure how much of a ceiling he necessarily has, but I think he can definitely hang in the NBA. Danny Wolf, wildly just baffling basketball player. Like 7-footer, right? 7-foot white dude. It's like if Kelly Olynyk like got juice. I don't know how to explain it. It's like if Kelly Olynyk got injected with steroids, as a kid or something like that, because he's athletic. Danny Wolf can like jump out the gym a little bit, and you're like, what the hell is going on here? But he's really intriguing. I haven't watched enough, to be honest with you. Like I've watched some stuff, but I don't know enough to be like, am I in on this guy or not? I would understand archetype wise why the Raptors would draft him, because he's a guy who can make plays. He's big. Obviously, the Olynyk comp is there. Can handle really well for a 7-footer too, because he used to play point guard. So it's just like, sure, I understand the process there with Danny Wolf. Noah Asenge also would understand the process. I'm not as in on Noah Asenge, admittedly, as other people. Like I kind of see the vision because he's doing well in a professional league and puts up numbers and like really helps his team win, does a bunch of things, defense, he's tall, he's incredible in transition, etc. Maybe he eventually develops as a shooter. I don't necessarily see it as much, because to me it's like he doesn't like jump out the gym despite his athleticism. And he kind of feels a little ground bound, even though he's a good transition player. And so I'm curious to see if any of that stuff will translate in the NBA. Again, this is more based on your intel. And so I don't have as much intel as the Raptors would when it comes to Noah Senge. If they like him, they like him. I would understand, because he's the archetype of the type of player that they're looking for. Hansen Yang, similar to, I would say like Thomas Sorber, in the sense that he's like traditional big, can do a little bit of everything, can handle. I would say like is really intuitive with his passing. Again, I haven't seen enough, to be honest with you, to like be like, yes, I would be down for Hansen Yang. But like from what you see, looks like a pretty cool player. Again, wouldn't go at 9, but I would understand trading down for him. These are guys who I either haven't watched a ton of or questions loom for. Yegor Demon, Joan Behringer, Jace Richardson, Nick Clifford, Will Riley, Liam McNeely, and Noah Penda. That's like 30 dudes I just mentioned there. You know what I mean? And that kind of goes back to where the Raptors are with their options. And the kind of the excess of choice, the too much choice ends up being actually a hindrance, in my opinion, with this Raptors team, what they might do in the draft, because they're in a position where there's no like clear cut option. If they were the eighth pick, if they were the seventh pick, it's like, all right, cool. There is a allotted group of players, from 3 to 8 that everybody in consensus says these are the guys after Cooper Flagg and Dylan Harper and VJ Edgecombe. But they're at 9. And so maybe one of those players falls to them. Like I mentioned with the Tre Johnsons and Ace Baileys and, Kon Knueppels and Jeremiah Fears of the world, and maybe Kaman Malawach, who seems to be in that group as well. Maybe they fall to them. And then you would be very, very happy with the fact that the Raptors got the 9th pick. They can take one of those guys. Cool. Let's rock. But the likely scenario is that, it seems like this draft is going to be pretty chalk. My perfect draft is drafting one of those guys that would be overjoyed for. And I think the other thing I would do is try to get another pick. That doesn't necessarily mean moving down. You could move down if you know that one of those guys will be there. But I like the idea of maybe trading for another pick, whether that's trading a future pick or multiple seconds to get into the late first round, because that's sort of the transaction cost here. I've looked at a couple of recent drafts and what it takes to buy into the late first round, especially with the NIL deal and the talent not necessarily being there as much. I would like for the Raptors to swoop in and get another first round pick. The other trade that I've seen suggested is for them to move RJ Barrett to get another lottery pick. I think the only team that makes sense for that is the Chicago Bulls. If the Raptors want to take on Patrick Williams' contract, which is 4 years and $18 million, and the Bulls are willing to take on RJ Barrett's contract, which is 2 years and about $25 million a year. Obviously, they get less years, the Bulls do, and we get their 12th pick. The Raptors get their 12th pick. And so now you have 9 and 12, and my perfect scenario there is drafting both Carter Bryant and Derik Queen. So my perfect scenario is getting 2 of the guys that I would be overjoyed for. That would be the best, absolutely best scenario for them. Is that going to happen? It's pretty unlikely. But I do think that the Raptors are doing something. We've seen it. It's been reported. Mark Stein said, they're thinking of Kevin Durant. They're thinking of moving back. They want to get a center. They're thinking of getting another lottery pick. There is a plethora of options for these Toronto Raptors. And truthfully, I'm at the point where I've done what I can research-wise. I've watched these guys on Synergy. I've watched the things that I'm interested in. I've listened to the people who I respect their opinions on. And that's all I can do. I'm not a draft expert, but I'm a person who, I'm really bought in on this draft now because I really have enjoyed this draft cycle. Maybe it's because the Raptors have a lottery pick, but I've just been bought in because, these guys are good. This draft feels good. This feels like a deep draft to me. I know we lost some of the late first rounders and second rounders because of the NIL, and I understand that. But where the Raptors are at 9, there's just so many options where I think it really goes back to how smart you are, how good your scouting department is, the intel that you have on these players. And I would probably put the Raptors on a short list of teams that I trust in that type of situation. I would say the Oklahoma City Thunder, I trust in that type of situation. The Memphis Grizzlies, I trust in that type of situation. The Miami Heat, I trust in that type of situation. And then I would probably put the Toronto Raptors there. I think the Raptors do an incredible job when they have time and intel to make a choice on one of these guys. They did it with Scotty Barnes. I think they did it with Grady Dick. I think they did it last year with Jacoby Walter and Jonathan Mobo and Jamal Shedd and maybe even Ulrich Shamshay. Who knows? They do well in the draft when they have the time to do so. The Malachi Flynn draft and that being in the pandemic kind of changed the draft for them. And it didn't allow them to get out there as much as they wanted to. I think the Raptors are in a position to find a guy. And the perfect draft for me, in summation, is for them to be able to find a guy if it's one of the guys that I mentioned, would be very happy here with what the Raptors draft situation is. But let me know. Let me know what you guys think. Just to kind of recap, my perfect 2024 NBA draft would be the Raptors do not trade for Kevin Durant. They draft one of Ace Bailey, Tre Johnson, Derik Queen, Carter Bryant, Jeremiah Fears, or Kon Knueppel. And I'd be happy with some others as well that we talked about here. And maybe they trade for another first-round pick. That would be my perfect draft for the Toronto Raptors. All right, folks, as always, subscribe to the Raptors Republic YouTube channel. Appreciate you guys locking in with us. I believe Samson and Trey are going to do a live show on Raptors Republic for the NBA draft. I will be on there as much as I can because we got something on The Athletic that we're doing as well. Appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for tapping in. Hope you guys enjoy the NBA Finals. By the time you watch this, there will be a new NBA champion, so congratulations either to the Oklahoma City Thunder or to the Indiana Pacers for winning the NBA championship. What an incredible playoff run has it been. And man, it's been a joy to cover it. So thank you very much. Appreciate you guys locking in with us. We will see you later. Bye-bye.